Welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to talk about React hooks. So, in my opinion, and from what I've seen in the industry, this is probably, React 16 altogether is probably the most exciting release that I've ever seen in any software product. Not software product, but software technology. Yeah, that's a better way to describe it. It is so cool. There's so much that you can do with React hooks. And yeah, so we're going to learn about what hooks are. We're going to start off with an introduction, talk about why they're even a thing, why they exist, what made the React team want to build React hooks. And then we'll get into some code. So I've got a few projects we're going to build together. And yeah, so let's go ahead and get started. Okay. All right, so what are hooks and why are they a thing? So hooks are a way to, hooks give us all of the features of React within functional components. So before the hooks were introduced and released, if you wanted to use state in your component or your application, you had to use a class component. If you wanted to use any lifecycle methods, you had to use a class component, which is fine. That's the way we've done things for years. But we now have hooks that are released that give us all of the features of class components that we can use inside functional components. So let's take a look at why this was even introduced. By the way, if you go to the hooks documentation in the React docs, if you haven't seen this video, watch this video. Sophie and Dan do an introduction that's 100 times better than anything I could do. So go watch this if you haven't watched this, and then come back to my live stream. Just kidding, watch it after this. Okay, so let's talk about why, the motivation behind hooks. Why are hooks even a thing? So in this talk, Sophie starts out and explains these three pieces of motivation, but it goes beyond that. The motivation is really good, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about why you should use hooks rather than class components. Okay, and if you're still not sold at that point, that's totally fine. These are not breaking changes. These are completely backwards compatible, so classes are not being removed. You can continue using classes and those patterns. Thanks for the follow. Joni. John, probably John. All right, cool. So why are hooks a thing? Well, first of all, the first thing we're going to talk about is that it's hard to reuse stateful logic between class components. So React doesn't offer a way to attach reusable behavior to a component, like connecting it to a store. That's why we have the higher order component connect in React Redux. If you've worked with React for a while, you may be familiar with the patterns like render props and higher order components that try to solve this. If you've ever worked with React render props or higher order components, they're awesome solutions for building or reusing stateful logic between components, but you have to restructure your components, and they can become cumbersome. Thank you. They're very cumbersome to work with and deal with, so they make your code harder to follow. And when you open up your dev tools, even though you can kind of filter out these extra patterns, looking in your dev tools is it's just a mess. There's consumers and providers everywhere, higher order components. Again, it's very tough to look at these patterns and understand what's going on at a quick glance. Okay, so with hooks though, we can extract stateful logic from a component so it can be tested independently and reused. So hooks allow you to reuse stateful logic without changing your component hierarchy. We're going to come back to this sentence when I talk about why you should use hooks, when I try to make the case for hooks over class components. So just looking at the comments here, I think that is a little bit out of scope for what we're dealing with. So yeah, if you can DM me after we're done, and I can I'd be happy to take a look at that your specific use case there. So okay, cool. So that's number one. Reusable stateful logic is really hard to do with classes. Very easy to do with hooks. Number two, complex components become hard to understand. If you've built a large application with a lot of moving pieces, then you've run into these problems before, and you've seen this before, and you've worked around it without realizing that it's really an issue until you use hooks, and you're like, wow, I can't believe how easy this is, where with a class, this is so tedious and a lot of extra work. So thinking about this, complex components become hard to understand. I want you to think about what you normally do. If you have a single component, class component, what would you normally use component did mount for? Well, you're probably fetching some data or kicking off a data fetch from inside component did mount. But what if you're let's say you're looking at a profile page for a client. You've got your software tracks clients. You're looking at a profile page for a client. When your component mounts, you're going to receive a prop for that client's with that client's ID, right? So you take that ID, you go fetch that client's data, you can build your profile. But then you click on another client without unmounting your profile component. So now this component did mount, the logic that you built into component did mount to fetch that data needs to be rewritten in component did update, because you now just received a new client ID, and you need to rebuild that profile with that client's data. So now you have two separate functions, each running the same logic. Okay, but it gets worse than this. What if that same component did mount contained something not related to fetching this client's data? What if it contained like an event listener? So your component did mount, a single function, is fetching data, is setting up event listeners. Those are unrelated logic. So one component, two pieces of unrelated logic. That event listener needs to be cleaned up inside component will unmount, right? So again, you're back to that first situation, two pieces of related logic separated out into two functions. But then component did mount is a single function with unrelated logic. So we start to see a problem here with complex components. Hooks let you split one component into smaller functions based on which pieces are related, such as setting up a subscription or fetching data. This is done with the effect hook. So with the effect hook, you can actually call, so in this situation, we have two things happening. We're fetching data, we're fetching client data, and we're setting up and cleaning up event listeners. With the useEffect hook, you just call the effect hook twice in that component, and you do all of your fetching data in all of your fetching logic in the first useEffect, and you don't split it up and you don't have any unrelated logic in that first function. The second function, you put all of your event listener logic inside there. So now we've compartmentalized the each piece of logic that we're trying to do inside this component into their own functions. and it's a lot easier to read and understand what's happening, and a lot easier for future development on that component. Components that are set up like this, even with just two things going on, usually I've worked with components that have quite a bit more going on in component did mount and component did update, component will unmount. With just those two things that we talked about, it's already becoming very complex and very hard to understand. But with hooks, you can split it all up logically in a way that makes sense. Okay, last thing is that classes confuse both people and machines. Most of us don't really have a great understanding of how this works in JavaScript. In a class component, we just kind of trust that it's referring to our class, and sometimes we forget to bind this to certain functions, and so we have to go into our constructor and do our binding syntax. But we don't really know why we're doing that. It's just the pattern that we see in Stack Overflow. That's fine. That's totally fine to do that. I don't think you can be a successful React developer without truly understanding this keyword. But it does raise an issue if we're using classes with so many people that don't really understand this. Is that the best situation for the React industry? Machines get confused by classes as well. So with when you write a class component and you minify that code, it ends up being just a function anyways. And it's so a lot of problems with classes already in JavaScript. I think these may get fixed in the future, but where it stands right now, this is a very valid concern. So, hooks let you use React's features without classes. All right. Those are the three pieces of motivation here in the React docs. The one thing that I want to talk about is in the React industry, we hear the word composability a lot. And whether or not we have the same definition as others, I think we all kind of mostly agree on what composability generally means. What I would argue, now that I've had 6-7 months to use hooks pretty regularly and years of using classes, I would argue that using hooks, using these functions, makes our applications a lot more composable than using classes. There's a really fantastic talk given by Ryan Florence and composable. Let's see. I'll find it in a little bit, and when we take a little break, and I'll post it on the chat. But it's the best argument I've seen for using hooks, and it takes a full hour and 10 minutes for them to really walk you through it and help you understand why hooks make your apps more composable. So if you're kind of on the edge, you're like, I don't know if hooks are really a great thing. I love classes. I've been doing it for years. Watch this talk. I think it'll be pretty eye-opening. Okay. Here we go. We're going to go ahead and jump into this. So here's the API reference that came with the React 16.8 release. The basic hooks that we use quite often, all the time actually, are useState, useEffect, and useContext. Then there's some additional hooks, useReducer, useCallback, memoref, etc. So we're going to look at useState and useEffect today, and we'll see how long that takes us and see if we can jump into use context. But at the very least, we'll be able to cover useState and useEffect well enough, and custom hooks well enough that I think you can take that knowledge and pretty much use any other hook that's listed here. So yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. I can get rid of that. So we're going to start with, let's see if this works in another tab. I was having problems with codesandbox. Looks like they're changing their URLs. Okay, yeah, that should work. So here you go. Boom. Jump onto that codesandbox if you'd like to follow along. And I'll also give you a live link if my computer can keep up with all the things it's trying to do right now. You may hear the fan on my computer rev up. Oh, that's not what I want. There we go. Okay, so there's the codesandbox link and the live link to follow this session here. All right, so let's take a look at what we have here in this application. So we've got an index page that's rendering our app component. We've got our app component that's a class component that's doing quite a bit of things here. So we've got some just hard-coded to-do data. We've got some state with to-dos, and that's grabbing our to-do data. We've got a to-do item here, that our to-do property that's being passed to our form to control our input. Okay, so this input is controlled by this property on our state. Testing 1, 2, 3. There it is. Cool. All right. We've got quite a few functions here. We've got a change to do. This is when we type into. Looks like that's a little broken. When we type into our input, this should be helping us change that value. We'll fix the bug here in just a second. We've got an add to do function that's going to do the logic for adding new to-dos. We can toggle to-dos completed by clicking on them. And then we can also clear any completed to-dos. And we've got that logic right here. So then in our render, we're rendering a list. And our list is passing down toggle complete and this .state.todos. And then our to-do form is passing down state.todo, this .change to do, add to do, and clear completed. I don't think we need clear completed. Toggle, I don't think we have. Oh, this is toggle, this is clear. Okay, yes, that's for that button. All right, I was thinking the toggle button. I was getting those two mixed up in my brain. First, let's go fix this input. So I think what's happening is our to-do form is just calling the wrong function. So it should be calling props.handle to do change. Oh, it is. And we need a name on here of to do. All right, so if you want that fixed, then make sure you add the name. And there we go. Awesome. All right. We are ready to rock and roll. So first thing we want to look at is the state hook. Now the state hook is going to we're going to import useState, and we're going to call useState and pass in an initial value that we want our state to be initialized with. And by calling this function, we're going to have an array returned from this function call. And this array is going to have two items. The first item is going to be the state, the piece of state that we want to have in our app, in our component. And then the second item in this array is a setter function. It's a function we can call like this to update our state. So this is, you can look at this by, thanks for the follow. You can look at this by, this is a piece of state on our state object, and this is a function similar to this.setState that's specific to this piece of state. So let's go ahead and we're going to create a new file here on the same level as app.js. We're just going to call this hookapp.js. So we're going to take this entire class component here. We're going to restructure this into a functional component that uses hooks. So we're going to be a little bit stuck for a little bit, so we're not going to worry too much about the view until we're at a point that it won't be throwing errors. So our hook app, let's go ahead and split this to the right so we can look at these at the same time. Hey, thanks for the follow. You guys are awesome. Okay, here we go. Import React from React. Haha, step one. The number of times I've written that in my code. We're also going to want these and our data. Okay. Now, as we start our application or our component here, this is going to be called hooks app or hook app. The first thing that we see when we come into this class is the constructor with a state object. So we want a piece of state in this functional component called to-dos. So if we want state inside a functional component, we need to import useState. Then we can come, we're going to return some JSX. Then we can come here and say const to-dos and set to-dos equals useState and invoke our useState function. Now remember, we can pass in some data to initialize the state that we're setting up here. So let's pass in to-dos data into useState. And let's just console log what these are, to-dos and set to-dos. Okay, if we want this console log to run, we need to render this function. So before we can render it, we need some JSX in here. So let's just come down here in our app and we're going to copy all of this and just paste it right there. And then export default hook app. Okay, so I'll give you a second if you would like to catch up. So again, we've built a functional component called hook app, and we've imported useState, and we are calling useState, passing in to-dos data, and it is returning this array with 2 items in the array. One is our to-dos array, and then another is a function that will set or update our to-do state. And then we just copied and pasted all of our imports, the data, and everything in our JSX straight from app.js. Yeah, snippets are awesome. Since I teach at Lambda School, I don't use snippets very much. I want my students to type these things out before they get into the shortcuts. So yes, I am a huge fan of snippets and use them often when I'm not teaching. But I'm in teaching mode tonight, so thank you for the follow. Woo! I need to find a fun way to celebrate. Actually, that fox dude is pretty cool. I'll take that. What's his name again? I always forget who that is. Why don't I see the hookapp.js file in my live instance of codesandbox? I'm not sure. Does anybody else not see this? Is that missing for Tells? Yes, Tells. Oh. Nice. Is anybody else missing hookapp? Got to refresh codesandbox. Yeah, don't forget to click the live link. Okay. Awesome. Okay, so we should have this about ready. So we're going to go into index.js, and we're just going to import app. We're going to import hook app from hook app. I know we don't need to rename this technically, but we're going to just to keep just we're not too confused. Okay, we are going to see issues here, but we should have our console log. Aha! Look at this. So we've got 2 objects. Okay, nope. We've got an array of objects. So this first thing that was console logged is our to-do list. So from, let me just bump this over a little bit, hook app, we are console logging to-dos and set to-dos from our useState return. So to-dos is the data that we passed in. We've got our array of 2 things here. And then set to-dos is a function. So we don't know exactly what it does, but we do see that we at least see that this is a function. And yeah, we'll play around with that in a minute. So let's close this back down, bump this back over. Okay, awesome. So now the next piece of this is taking our to-dos and passing our to-dos to our to-do list. So instead of referring to our to-dos here as this.state.todos, we've namespaced them here under to-dos. So we have const to-dos. So we can take that to-dos item and pass it into our to-do list. Good question. Set to-dos is a banana name. That's what my students fondly refer to. Anything that, like a foobar name, anything you can set yourself. Yes, both of these are foobar names. And it's really cool. Yeah, go Tails. Thanks for the follow. Awesome. Ooh, a Lambda student. I know 10, how you doing? So the to-dos and set to-dos are foobar banana names. If this returned an object instead of an array, hey, thanks everyone, we would not be able to set our own names like this. Like if this came back as state and set state. If you wanted to rename it, you'd have to do that and set to-dos. So I think it was really smart to return an array out of useState, so we didn't have this really verbose way of renaming things. So we're destructuring an array similar to how we can destructure objects. What's cool though is in objects, it's the name that matters, so you can list anything in any order and destructure anything in any order you want, which is really good in most use cases, but sometimes you just want to be able to rename something on the fly as you're destructuring it. So with array destructuring, it's the order that matters. So whatever element is in the first, in index 0 in this array is going to be named to-dos in this function. And then whatever element in the array that's returned here is the second element in this array is now going to be named set to-dos. It's super cool. Yeah, so our best friend Dan Abramov says that to-dos should be the function here, our setter function here, should be used with or named with the word set in front of it. That's going to be kind of the convention that we see. Cool. Okay, so we've got our state. We're passing it down to our to-do list. Yeah, we're still going to have errors because we don't have state. Maybe if we just keep this blank for a minute, or let's just say to do, nope. Okay. Thanks for the follow. Haguna Matata. That's awesome. Okay, so we're not at a point that we can quite look yet, but we're going to get there. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to set up our to-do form to pass in the value that we're getting right here. So now we're looking at our second piece of state in this component. So we're going to say const to-do is our other piece of state right here. And of course, what's the next one we pass in? Set to-do. Use state. We're going to initialize this with an empty string. Ah, cool. Okay, so we've got now two pieces of data. We're invoking useState twice, which is really cool. There are going to be some components that have a ton of data on state that you'd probably want to build in an object, maybe outside of the component, and pass in that object, and then you'd have like a state object that's available to you right here. So I think if you find yourself using a lot of use states all right in a row to give yourself 5 or 6 values from your state object, it might be better to build an object and pass that in and just get a state object back right here. I haven't run into that yet because I haven't built a lot of big things, big components, but I imagine that's what I would do. Okay, so the next part of this, we now have our to-do, which is the value on our to-do form. So we're going to go ahead and pass down to-do rather than this.state.to-do. So now we should be at a point that we can check this out. Nope, we still have all of this keyword. All right, let's do this. Watch this. We're just going to cheat a little bit here. And we're just going to get rid of that, and that. Ah, cool. Hey, check that out. We have our list being displayed, right here by our state, our to-do state. And then our value is being controlled by this. We won't be able to type into it, but if we change the default value here, we should be able to see that reflected up here. Hooks are awesome. Woo! Nice. It's working. It's working. Bam. Okay. State inside functional components. But we're not even near anywhere completed with this. We have to do all of this logic here. We have to build that into our component as well. So let's go ahead and let's do this handle toggle complete. So we've got this function here. I'm just going to copy this and pass that over here. And we're going to, now that this is a function and not a class property, we're going to do const in front of it. And we're going to come down to our list. And what is the property it's looking for? Handle toggle completed. You know what, I'm just going to copy this and paste it there. But then, of course, remove this. Okay, so I'll give you a second to bring those two pieces over. Handle toggle complete, prop passed down to to-do list, and the function right here. I know, we're really close to bringing in custom emojis. I think this might be the last stream that we can, until we can do that. So I think after this is done, then we can do custom emojis. All right, so you should have that in, and we should be able to now toggle. Oh, no, we can't toggle because look at this. We're trying to use state inside here. So let's change this up. We want to, we're capturing, let's see, to-dos. I'm just going to do all of this logic in one fell swoop. All right, so the plan is when we invoke this function and get the ID of the to-do we clicked on, we want to toggle the completed property to of that to-do, which means we need to update our to-dos list that we're getting from this useState call. So in order to do that, all we need to do is call set to-dos and then pass in the new array of our to-dos. Now with this .set state, I would usually, if this was a this.set state call, and we're passing in an object, we would do this, right? To-dos, and then this.state.todos.map. I'm a fan of the one-liner. I'm just wondering, I think I've been mostly doing this, capturing new to-dos and doing my logic here, and then passing new to-dos into my not set state, set to-dos. So I'm going to do that. So we've got new to-dos. We're going to take our to-dos. We're going to map over them. Look at one to-do at a time. Map, of course, is going to return a new array, which is going to be passed into set to-dos. And by invoking set to-dos and passing in a new array, we should see our component update with those changes. So we should see one of these toggled to true with that strike through CSS. All right, so the logic behind this is the same logic, let's see, that we have up here. So we're going to map over to-dos. If to-do.id equals ID, then so we can say if to-do.id equals the ID that we're passing in. That means we're looking at the correct to-do. So I'm going to return a new to-do object, spread in to-do, and override the completed property with the opposite of the old completed property. And then if it's not the to-do we're looking at, we just return the to-do untouched. All right, so new to-do should be that new array. We should update, this should be updating our data, and voila. Very nice. So if you're used to this .set state, this is going to be the same thing. The biggest difference, of course, is set to-dos is just for our to-dos array. We can't run set to-dos and expect it to update to-do. The logic inside is going to be pretty much the same, though. Okay, so there's our toggle completed. Let's go ahead and add the add to do. Oh, you know what? Let's do our handle changes on our to do form. So our to do form is expecting handle to do change to handle changes for when we type into that input. I'm just going to call this handle changes. And let's come out here and we're going to do a const handle changes. And this is going to take in an event similar to this one here. Now again, instead of running set state, we're going to run set to do. So to do is the piece of state that is controlling our form, controlling our input. Set to do updates that piece of state. We get the new value we want on e.target.value. All right, let's go look at that one. Can we type? Can we type? Yes, we can. Nice. Notice with each time I type, I'm running console log. That's because just like running this.set state, anytime we update our state from our use state hooks, we're going to re-render this function, and we're console logging we're console logging to-dos and set to-dos a whole bunch of times. So every time I type, we get a new console log, or if I click on this, we get a new console log each time. So this continues to run because we're re-rendering the app. Okay, awesome. Ooh, we're doing good. This is exciting. I'm going to pause here for a second before we do our filtering or adding, and I want to talk about this handle changes. So with this pattern here that we have in, how do I close this? Oh, it's way over there. All right, so this pattern that we have that we're used to with class components and with set state is it's a really cool pattern that lets us manage multiple inputs with one function, right? This is not going to be able to do the same thing. We can't, if we had another input, we'd have to add a new useState call. We'd have to get a new piece of state for that input, which would be the same here, new input, right? So that makes sense. However, we can't call a function in the same way that we are setting property values with the bracket notation. So the way that we can do this is actually pretty ingenious. We can build our own hook. Remember, part of the motivation behind hooks was to let us reuse stateful logic. Well, take a look at this. This is some stateful logic. Let's build our own custom hook that allows us to reuse this kind of logic to control multiple inputs. Whew, okay, building a custom hook. Let's do this. Let's come down here underneath our hook app, and we're going to have a function that we're going to call useInput. Oh. Okay. This looks kind of like this hook, right? We have the use name on here. The convention for custom hooks is to name a custom hook with the word use in front of it, because this is for the linters and to help keep us from running into trouble. One of the rules of hooks is the order that we call hooks matters, and we can't call hooks inside nested functions. So I can't say, this isn't, by the way, this isn't a hook, this is just a function returned by hook, but we're not calling useState in here. I can't say const things set things equals useState. We get some problems here. So let's look at the error. It says React hook useState is called in a function, which is neither a React function or a custom React hook function. So our linters, because of the word use in front of this hook, our linter knows that we've called a hook inside a function that's neither a component nor a custom hook. And you can, there's some good write-ups for why this is important that we're not going to have time to get into today, but that is a rule. And so because of that rule, if we name our custom hooks with the use word in front of whatever else we want to call it, then our linters can warn us when we're breaking those rules. So let's talk about this useInput function. When I'm looking at this, there's a couple pieces in this component that are related to inputs. So I see this useState call, and I see this function here. So let's just pull this out, and let's put it down here inside useInput. Okay, and let's pull this function. Well, let's leave this here for a second, because now we've got a couple things broken. We don't have to do, we don't have set to do, right? So I'm going to return to do and set to do out of useInput. That means if I call useInput somewhere, I can destructure to do and set to do out of wherever I call this. All right, let's try it. So maybe something like const to do set to do. useInput. Huh, let's see what happened. Hey, look at that. Wait a second. This could easily be working without it actually being controlled. Let's try this. Is this controlled? Yes. Control lead. Haha. All right. Okay. But we still have this function up here that's not reusable. So we could, if we wanted to, we could say something like const to do. We'll rename this to other to do, and set to do, rename it to set other to do equals use input, and invoke it. Remember how we just talked about this, how we don't like renaming this? Let's come down here and return an array out of this function, which means we have to destructure an array. And that means that we can do something like this. We can just rename these without being super verbose. Okay, so we've got to do, other to do, set other to do. Let's pass, let's go look at our input, our form, to do form, and uncomment out, uncomment out. I never know how to say that. You comment out code. Do you uncomment code? Uncomment out code? I don't know. So this input is looking to be controlled by props.value2. Okay, so we've got our second input out here. Uncomment in. Comment in our code. I love it. So if we pass down a value 2, so let's say value 2. Now let's give the value for this other to do. Okay. How can we know if this is being controlled by this use input or not? Well, we can do this. Default value. Oh, they both get default value, so they are being controlled. What if we could pass a default value in here, grab it as an argument here, and pass it in right here. So let's try input 1. Oh, input 2. Haha, yes. Woo! Wow, it's so cool. Nice. Okay. We're almost there. That is half of the coolness of our use input. Because remember, the goal is to try and make this reusable between both functions, right? I mean both inputs. So let's look at our inputs. We've got on change, takes in handle to do change, handle to do change. I think we're gonna have to have a handle to do change too. So let's do this. Let's come down here. Let's take this handle changes function out of here. And we're going to declare it inside here. Then we can return handle changes here which means we can destructure it out of here. So handle changes, which gets passed in there. So we can control input 1 that way. Handle changes 2. Oh, what happened there? Now we can control. Nope. Wah, wah, wah. To do form should change, handle to do change, on change. Maybe I spelled it wrong somewhere. Oh, handle changes. Okay, that's why. So now, there we go. Okay, cool. Nice. All right, so let's take a look at this real quick. We just wrote a custom hook that returns a value, a setter, and a handle changes function, and we can control multiple inputs just by calling this custom hook somewhere in our app. Let's make this a little bit. What if we didn't want to use this input for a to-do list? What if we just wanted something else? Let's do value and set value. Then we have to return value and set value and set value there. Okay, that's a little more reusable. Now, think about this. It's pretty similar to what we're doing up here, right? However, can you, well, we can do this, but it's not as elegant. Think about that. We can export this custom hook. We can import it to any component that needs an input or 5 inputs. Call it as many times as we need in that component. And we have a single function that's controlling an unlimited number of inputs in our application. If we had 10 components, 10 class components that each had 5 inputs, we would have this function being written 5 times. We would have 5 state objects. This logic, because it's tied directly to this class, is not reusable. We can't export this, import it into the next component. We have to rewrite this function. We don't have to do that with this hook. It's super awesome. Yeah, technically they are getting different instances of this function. So when you call it, it is a new instance of that function, but you don't have to rewrite the code over and over again. Whew, okay. I'm gonna look at comments and then we're gonna take just a short little break so I can get some water for my throat. All right, Snowcoder, nice. We have similar names. Is the fact that the custom hook has useState in it make it a hook over just a function? If it didn't have that useState, would it be just a function? That's a great question. So what makes this a custom hook is not the fact that it's a function or even the fact that it has a custom hook inside it. It's the name. No, I'm just kidding. It's the way that we're using it. It's the way that it's set up, like this. So, and technically it is the name for the linter. But yeah, let's go look at what the docs say about it. So let's see. When we want to share logic between two JavaScript functions, we extract it into a third function. Both components and hooks are functions, so this works for them too. A custom hook is a JavaScript function whose name starts with use and that may call other hooks. So the difference, it's very similar to just having a reusable function. The difference is that we can now put in stateful logic into a function. As I mentioned before, hey, thanks for the follow. Jay's here. What's up, Jay? So as we just mentioned, this stateful logic right here can't be shared with another component. However, inside a hook, we can share stateful logic. There's probably more about it in here. Definitely go look at the building your own hooks documentation. Do you make a directory for your hooks and import them? Oh, great question. Yeah, let's do that before we take a little break. So yeah, let's build a directory. We'll call this hooks. And we'll have a use input.js. Okay, so we'll go to, let's just slide this over here. Hooks app. Let's get this out of here. Throw it in here. Okay, we need to import useState. This is not a component, so we don't need React. We just need useState from React. All right, so that's set up in there, which means we need to import it. I'm going to import this above my components, kind of like a util function. Import, let's see, this is a named export. Use input from /hooks. Let's do this. Let's also set up an index.js, and we'll say export use input. I always forget when I need to have the imports. Let's see if this works. Okay, that worked. Yay! Look at that. That's so cool. Great suggestion, Jay. Love it. Yes, definitely recording. And Twitch is capturing this as we from the beginning, so you'll be able to come back to my channel when I'm done, and this video will be available for 30 days, I believe. More folders to dig around. Yes, yes. All right, I'm gonna take a short break, and we'll be back. Let's say about 5 minutes. Cool. First, I want to give a shout out to some of our international viewers. So it looks like we've got someone from Brazil and Vietnam. Krakow. I don't know how to say that. I'm so horrible. Welcome, welcome. I love watching the locations on there. It's so cool. Thanks for joining. All right. Let's keep going here. So we've moved out our use input. Here we can import this anywhere in our app and use multiple, or control multiple inputs with this. Now you'll notice that we're not actually using the set to do, the set functions here. So there's a couple things we could do. If we don't need to use them, I think it's good to return them. Maybe one thing we can do with array destructuring is we can actually just delete that and leave, this looks so weird, but just trust me on this. Leave this blank, but leave the comma there. And this is valid syntax in JavaScript. What it means is we're destructuring an array with 3 values in it. But we don't need to use this second value. But remember, with destructuring array, the order is important. It's not the name, it's the order. So if you only need the first and third value, you have to somehow specify that you're going to skip a value in here. And this is how we would do that. Kind of crazy, huh? So indifferent ghost, I love it. Thanks for the suggestion there. We are going to bring that back in just a few minutes here when we add a little bit more to this, just so we can clear out our input when we click add. But for now, I think that's a great thing to review and look at. Awesome, so let's do the rest of this here, the rest of our functionality. We're going to bring this add to do functionality into here. So handle add to do. Oh, here we go. And we're going to have a function called add to do. So let's create that function inside here. Let's say const add to do. And does this take any? Yes, it takes in the event because it's a button click. And we're going to run event.prevent default. Now we need to add a to-do to our to-do list. So normally we would run this.setState and update our to-do list, right? But instead of this.setState, we now have set to-dos. So let's create a new list of to-dos, new to-dos. And this is going to be kind of the same logic we would use in setState. We're going to spread in our old to-dos. We're going to pass in a new to-do object. So to-do has a task with the name on it. So task, we get the name from our to-do input, right? Let's just close this and give ourselves some more room here. Oh, that's better. All right, new to-dos. We're creating a new array, spreading in our old to-dos, and creating a new to-do object. The task is whatever's on our to-do input. The ID, we're just going to use date.now. And then we're always going to initialize to-dos, new to-dos with completed as false. Okay, so we can take our new array, pass it into set to-dos, like this. But then we also, when we click add to do, that add to do button, we also want to clear out our to do. So that's where our set to do function comes in handy that we're returning here. So we're going to call set to do. Boom, just like that. So let's add a new to-do, new thing, click add to-do. Aha! It's there. Oh, hooks are so fun. This is awesome. I hope you guys are really enjoying this because I love this. Oh, okay. The final piece of this is going to be filtering. So clear completed to-dos gets passed in as handle clear to-dos. That one will go there. And of course, we get rid of this. This one also takes an event. And cool. Clear completed to-dos, event dot prevent default. So someone just commented, I'm lost in the syntax, but it looks really organized, so I want to learn it. Yeah, that's okay. If the syntax, if you're lost in the syntax, don't worry about it. Play around with it. But just make a counter app with some state. Start simple. Start with something that maybe you've done with classes. Maybe open up an app that you have with a class component, and just work on it one piece at a time. It took me a few tries to really get used to the syntax. But now that I know it, yeah, it's way better. Okay. So clear completed to-dos. The logic here is, of course, we're going to have const new to-dos, and we're going to map over our current to-dos and look at one to-do at a time. We're going to return whether to-do is completed. Right? If it's completed, we want it out. So nope, this is opposite. If it's completed, flip that to falsy, don't add it to our new array. All right, so then set to-dos, pass in new to-dos. Uh-oh, something happened. Let's see what happened here. Oh, look at this. We returned true and falsy. What? That shouldn't be returning true and false. That should be returning, oh, dot map, that's why. Dot filter, ba-da-ba-da. That's better, much better. Woohoo! It's working, it's working. Hey, we got a few more international listeners. Indonesia, hello. And Canada. Awesome. I love this. This is so fun. If you're up to it, give me a follow, and I'll be doing quite a few live streams, mostly about hooks. I feel like there's a lot of space for hooks education right now. Cool. All right, so there's one problem with all of this, and that is our class component. We're trying to simplify things, right? Our class component is looking pretty similar to our hooks component. I feel like this could possibly be an opportunity to abstract some more of this stateful logic, don't you? Got a lot of stateful logic going on. Maybe you have two to-dos in an app. I don't know. Even though a to-do list isn't the best use case for a custom hook, maybe you're not going to have multiple to-do lists in any given app. But I think it will illustrate again the power of hooks and how awesome it is to be able to abstract stateful logic and share that across your app. So what we're going to do is we're going to build another hooks file called, we'll just call this use list, I guess. We'll call it use to-do list. Create file, use to-do list.js. And we'll bump this one over here. And we'll go back to hook app. Okay, so import. Now if we look at our hook app, what's the logic we have we'll just start at the top and we'll take every piece of logic that has to do with the to-dos and we'll move it into here. So we are going to have useState, so we're going to import useState. From React. We're going to have a function called useToDo. We're going to export this. Export const useToDo list. We're probably going to take in some default data like we did in our input, right? Default state. Okay, so let's just do this one piece at a time. Let's pull out our to-dos state. Put that in here. Oh, don't you hate when you do that? There we go. Copy an empty line. We'll call this default state. So we're going to initialize to-dos with default state, and we're going to return to-dos and set to-dos. We probably won't need set to-dos, so we'll come back to grab what we need in a second. So const to-dos equals use, is it in here yet? To-do list. Oh, let's put it on use to-do list and pass in our to-dos data. Okay, but we want to import it from here. Whoop, something weird happened. I'll just get rid of that line. Okay, so in our hooks index.js, export use input. No, use to-do list from use to-do list. There we go. Hey, look at that. We don't need useState inside here anymore. Cool. So this is going to return to-dos. So now we've got our to-dos. We don't need set to-dos here. So let's move this whole function out of here. And let's see. So we're going to need, let's take a look at add to do. If we return add to do and pass it in and destructure it here, then that takes care of that. But we have a little bit of a problem here, right? So we've got our, we need our to do from right here inside here. So when we need data inside this function, we can maybe just pass it in. But it's not available here yet because we're declaring it right here. So let's just bring our to-dos list down. Okay, so we're passing in that to-do. So now when we create a new to-do, we can add that to-do as the task here. But what about this set to-do? Let's pull this set to-do out of here. Let's do this. Let's call this add new to-do. And we can have one function in here to kind of take care of setting our to-do. Add new to-do is a function that takes in an event. And we're going to call add to do. We don't need to pass in the event because we're just going to take care of that right up here. but we are going to call add to do, which is going to take in this to do and add a new to do. So we don't have to pass anything into add to do. And then we're going to call set to do and make that a string. All right, so when we click the add to do button, what's going to happen is this function here gets invoked, and we're going to add a new to do. We're going to invoke this function that we're getting back from our custom hook here. We're passing in whatever is on in our input. And so we get that from there. So yeah, that should be good. So let's do kind of similar things with all of this. Let's pull this one out of here. And we'll go ahead and return that function. That doesn't need anything else from the outside, it just needs to-dos, right? To-dos and set to-dos. Okay. And clear completed to-dos. We'll do the same thing. This also doesn't need anything external, just needs to-dos and set to-dos. And we'll just return that right there. Ha. Now look at this component. That is the full size of our component right there. A complete to-do component compared to our app.js, which is all of this. Oh man, way cleaner. Now I get it. This logic is written out somewhere, right? But let's just pretend for a second that you had an app that needed 10 to-do lists. I know that's not, again, it's not a great use case, but there is a lot of components that have this much logic that is shared. So let's pretend we have that. We can just call our hook and get all the things we need, all the pieces we need right here from our custom hook. The best thing about this, yes, you can do this with a higher order component. However, you're not, with a higher order component, you're changing your component hierarchy. You're adding unnecessary layers inside your component hierarchy. With custom hooks, you're not doing that. That makes hooks way more composable than class components. Whew. Okay, off my soapbox. I just love this pattern. Look at this. This is a to-do list, fully functioning to-do list in React, a React component here. Well, shouldn't speak too early. Let's go make sure everything works. New to-do, add toggle, clear completed. Whoop whoop. Totally working. Awesome. Whew. Cool. Yeah, so there's that for use state and custom hooks. Let's also take a look. We're also going to take a look at useEffect. So we're gonna switch gears here a little bit and talk about the effect hook. This one's a little bit different than all the other hooks, and I love the effect hook because it makes us think about components and state differently than what we've been doing, than what we've seen with class components. So let's take a look at this app here. What we're going to do is we're going to have a side effect in this application. And our side effect is going to be an event listener. So we're going to set an event listener that listens for when the browser changes sizes or is resized. And it's going to display the new size right here on the view. Okay, so let's talk about the effect hook real quick. So the effect hook. Now, from in the beginning, remember we talked about how one of the pieces of motivation for hooks is that complex components become hard to understand. And we gave some examples of how that's true just with 3 different lifecycle methods. And the many different things that you'll do in a single lifecycle method, and how you'll do similar related logic, but you'll have to do that multiple times in different lifecycle methods. With the effect hook, this gives us a way to bring all of our logic for a single effect into one function. And then we can, just like useState, we can call useEffect multiple times in a component and run multiple side effects in a single component, but keep all the related logic together and keep unrelated logic separate. So let's just look at the example that React gives us here. So here's a side effect that's happening. We're using the document object to change the title of our app. So we've got some state, we've got count state initialized as 0, and we've got set count that when we click on this button, we are incrementing our count state. Set count, we're passing in count +1. Now, we just saw that this is going to stay in sync, right? However, if we didn't have something like this, we wouldn't be able to keep this in sync. In a class component, we could, let's see, I think if we go down here, it shows us, yeah. In a class component, when the component mounts, we want to set our title. But when the component updates, every time we click this button, we can't rerun component.mount. We would have to put the same logic right here inside component.update. Okay, so that's one side effect. Example using hooks. Let's go back down here. Okay, so here's another example. What if we wanted to subscribe to a real-time API, or add an event listener like we're about to do? In a class component, we would have to subscribe to that or add the event handler in component.mount and clean it up inside component will unmount. So now we've got 2 pieces of related logic separated out into 2 functions. And usually, since they're in different since these are in different functions here, the callback function has to be outside those functions. So now we have 3 places that our related logic lives in. And that's just to subscribe to an API. That's just doing one thing. 3 places for this one single thing. Well, take a look at useEffect. One function, we subscribe, we clean up, and we have our callback handler. All of those things in one place. It's so cool. Now, in a class component, when we want to clean up a subscription or an event listener, we do that in component will unmount. With the useEffect hook, let's go up to this useEffect right here. The useEffect hook takes in a callback function. So we pass in an anonymous arrow function here. We run whatever side effect we want to run. If we need to, if our side effect needs to be cleaned up, then we return a function out of this inner function, out of this callback function. So coming back down here, we have our callback function here, and we have a function being returned out of our callback function. And the return function is basically our cleanup function. So we put our unsubscription, we unsubscribe or we remove event listeners inside this return function. So we'll take a look at that in just a second. What I want to show you is the power of what if these two cases we were looking at were combined into a single component. Well, this is what the class component would look like. We'd have a constructor with state and binding things. Componented mount, let's look at that. We have two side effects, completely unrelated side effects living together. Componented update is related to this side effect. Component will unmount is related to this side effect. Handle status change is related to these side effects. It's all over the place. I mean, I never knew that this was a problem until the day that hooks was announced and they showed this. I was like, well, of course that's an issue. Like, why haven't we recognized this before? So now look at the hook, the effect hook inside a functional component. So we've got, back up here, by the way, we've got two pieces of state that are related to our two side effects, right? Is online and count. So check this out. Look at this organization. We've got a functional component. We've got one piece of state that's related to this useEffect. This useEffect has all the related logic for this side effect. Then we come down here. We've got the state for our chat API effect, side effect, and all of the logic for our side effect inside this one function compared to this. It's amazing. Okay, one caveat here is that this effect, one thing that's been good about this is we know exactly when this logic will run, right? We can control effect hooks. We can control when effect hooks run, but by default, they're going to run every time any piece of state or any prop changes. So any props that change or any state that changes that cause a re-render, this effect will run. Well, we don't want that to happen all the time, right? So the best way that I've seen this put, let me see, I may have saved this. No, Ryan Florence, aha. Oh, come on. That should have been, let me see now that we're in Twitter if it'll bring it up. Is it this one? No, this is the wrong one. Don't worry, I'll find this. This is the best explanation I've seen. Right here. This is it. Okay. So this came up with this tweet. It says, I keep writing use mount hook. It's easier to scan for in code than use effect. Basically, my brain can't remember this. Use effect function, run after each render. Use effect, a second argument after our callback function, runs after mount. So Dan Abramov said, I think it'll continue to be unintuitive if you keep thinking in terms of mounting and updating. Which is true, but that's the mental model we've had building React apps with classes, is mounting and updating. So what's a different way to think about this? Well, hello, Ryan Florence. The question is not when does this effect run? The question is, with which state does this effect synchronize with? So this is the old mental model. With hooks and with the effect hook in particular, this is the new mental model that we need to start thinking in. With which state does the effect synchronize with? So, as I mentioned before, a useEffect hook is called every time any state or props changes by default. However, we can skip effects by telling our effect hook, telling this side effect which piece of state to synchronize with. So let's think back at our example here. Way up here, we've got this effect happening for changing our title when we update our count. But what happens if a props change, or what happens if isOnline changes? Then right now, this effect hook, this side effect will run again. It's not going to change anything. Count is still the same. Your title is going to stay the same, but you are performing a side effect, and your performance isn't going to be as good in this component. It's not going to be terrible, but there could be some side effects that do make this pretty terrible. Anyways, the point is that we really only want to sync this effect with this piece of state. Again, going back to this, with which state does this effect synchronize with? So it's pretty easy to think about it here. This effect should only sync with count. It should only watch for changes on count. When count changes, we want this effect to run again. And we do that by passing in a class, we would do this if statement here. If our previous state.count is different than our new state.count, go ahead and run this side effect. Now we just tell our side effect to synchronize with count. So wouldn't there then be cases where this could accidentally run into max stack size exceeded? Yes, there could be. But you can do that with componented update as well if you didn't wrap it inside an if statement, right? And so just like in componented update, if you forget to do this, you'll see that immediately. That's not really going to be something that gets past testing. Same with useEffect. You can definitely run into the max stack size if you don't include this. So you'll see that pretty quick. You get used to this. I've been writing useEffects now for a few months, 4 or 5 months. I've really dove into useEffect, and this becomes super intuitive, just like this pattern became really intuitive with class components. Okay, enough talk. Let's do some code. I'm gonna grab a drink real quick. All right, I'm going to stop this live session, and here is our window resize. So you can fork that sandbox, and I'll drop a live link. I think my voice is going out. Oh boy. So there's the live link as well. Cool, so jump on the live link if you want. I'm bad at saving and codesandbox's autosave clashes with itself all the time, and you just get tons of errors popping up. So I don't autosave in codesandbox. But we have the live link, so you can watch the live session happening. Okay. So the idea here is that we've got this is a very simple app, right? All we're doing is displaying the width and height of our browser size. Size.width and size.height obviously aren't anything because size is just an empty object right now. So we're not displaying anything at the moment. But we're going to get there really quick. So let's create a new file called usewindowsize.js. Hey, we're going to write a custom hook. And let's do const useWindowSize equals a function. And we're going to return an object with width. It's going to be set to window.innerWidth. Whoa, on compass needs calibration. Okay. Inner width. There we go. And height is window.inner. Why does it keep doing that? Inner height. Cool. Let's export this here. Bring it into our index. Import useWindowSize from /useWindowSize. Now instead of size being set to this, we're going to set our size to useWindowSize invoked. Hey, there we go. We got our window size. But it doesn't update when we drag. What a drag. See what I did there? Okay, that was low even for me. I can do better. All right. So how to make this a custom hook that we can actually use? Well, first let's set up some state. So we need to import useState. Since we're up here, we know we're going to have useEffect, so go ahead and bring in useEffect. Okay, let's do const window, or let's say const size set size equals useState. We'll initialize this with this object here. And we'll return size. Very cool. So next step, we want to set up a side effect that is going to set our size every time we resize the browser. Yeah, useEffect time. Heck yeah. Okay, so useEffect, remember, gets called with a callback function here. And now we can just do our logic for whatever our effect is. So the effect we want to have is to run window dot add event listener. We're going to listen for the resize event. And we'll call resize, or let's call handle resize. Okay, so we need a handle resize function in here, const handle resize. We don't really know what's going in here yet. So let's just finish this part out. So we've got a side effect that requires cleanup. So again, just like we saw before, we're going to return a function that will run window.remove event listener and then pass in the same arguments here. Let's just slide this down a little bit. There we go. Cool. So we're setting up an event listener. We're cleaning up our event listener. The live code sandbox updates are ahead of the video. There's typing and then comes the explanation on the video. That's awesome. Yeah, I think it's not too much of a lag with Twitch. It's only a few seconds, but probably enough that you see that first. That's cool. I didn't even think about the implications with our live link and Twitch. Okay, so what are we going to do inside this function here? We could just say set size and pass in this, but that's not too dry, right? Let's just write a function real quick that we'll call this resizer. I don't know. Works for me. And let's call set size, or let's return. We're going to implicitly return an object with all of this in it. Oh, I did it again. Okay. So instead of explicitly passing in the window inner width and inner height, we're going to just call resizer right here. All right, so that worked, right? We got our initial size. One thing that's interesting that I haven't looked into why this works or why this happens, but apparently you don't need to invoke resizer, and it still works. So, I don't know why. That doesn't work for set size though. That only works in use state. Set size, we do have to invoke resizer. Okay, wait a second. I think we're done. We've got size, state right here, right? We've got a helper function just to return window width and size, so we didn't have to reuse that logic. We could keep it dry. We've got our effect running, but what state is this syncing up with right now? If we were passing in some props or I guess some kind of argument, and this change, well, let's take a look at this. In our index.js, let's say this was some component that was way down in the component tree. We were receiving props. Anytime props changes here, we would rerun use window size, which would rerun this entire effect because size, it's not synced with anything, right? So any change is going to have us add an event listener and remove an event listener. If we had use state inside this function that changed, this would run again. So let's go ahead and sync our effect up with size. Oh, this needs to be passed in an array. What's cool about this is we could pass in multiple things. So if we had an argument up here, we could say, let's sync this effect up with both of these things. Or if we had multiple pieces of state. But for this, of course, we just want it to sync with size. Actually, no, we don't. We don't even want to do that. Yes, it is being recorded. We don't want to sync this up with size because every time size changes, we're going to add a new event listener. Nope. With our event listener, we don't want to sync this up with any state. So let's look at this tweet again. If we just pass in a function, we're synced up with all state. If we pass in an empty array, we're synced up with no state. If we pass in an array with different values, we're going to sync up this effect with only those pieces of state. So coming back to here, remember our subscription example. Our subscription only doesn't sync up with anything, any kind of props or any kind of state changes. Componented update. Why is that in componented update? Oh, that's if the friend ID changes. Okay, I get it. Bad example. Rewind. Let's try this again. So let's think of an event listener. We don't want to be adding and removing event listeners every time our size changes. Think of how many times our size is going to change. It's every time the pixel changes, we're going to be resetting size. So if we sync this up with size, that's how often it's going to run this code. We only want this, we're not going to sync this up with any state. So it'll initialize, and it'll clean up when the component is unmounting, but it's not going to be in sync with anything else in this hook. Okay, let's try it out. Here we go, drum roll. Oh yeah, take a look at that. Woo, it's working, it's working. Haha, so cool. Yeah, I'll share this link right here. There you go. Man, it's so cool. Okay, so there we go. Effect hooks, state hooks, custom hooks. I'll go ahead and we can chat for a few minutes before we jump off. I'll just watch the chat and see if there's any questions that you guys want to bring up and chat about before we finish off. Thanks for joining. If you want to jump off, if you're going to jump off now, thank you very much. Please follow me so that you get notified when I go live and you can watch the next stream. Thanks. Have a great night. Is useRef next week? Yeah, we can do. Oh, thanks for the follow. Tails is the best. We can do useRef. Yeah. I'll have to come up with a good example for useRef. I haven't used refs even before hooks very much. I mean, I did a couple times, but not very often. Can we use hooks for build week? Yes, absolutely. So build week, for those of you who aren't Lambda students, I'm an instructor at Lambda School, and every 5 weeks, each cohort moves into a new unit. So the first 5 weeks in the web course is like HTML, CSS, JavaScript. The next 5 weeks is React, and then the following 5 weeks is backend. So during each 5-week unit, there's 4 weeks of instruction and afternoon project time. And then a week, the final week of each unit, is what we call build week, where students from each unit work together on a collaborative project. So you'll have a student from Unit 1, a student from Unit 2, and a student from Unit 3 all working together to build a project together. It's so cool. So they work on a project for a week and then move into their next unit. So that's what build weeks are. Cool. Let's see. So before we had put the event listener component did update and remove event listener component did mount, but now with hooks we just do this. Yes, with hooks it all goes into this one single function call. not function call, function. Oh, I guess useEffect is a function call. Thanks for the follow. Woo! And again, this is really interesting. We're trying to get away from thinking about like comparing these to lifecycle methods. If you're having a hard time switching that mental model, though, you can think about just your basic code inside here. If we have, well, no, I don't want to get into that. This is the cleanup, or the function that's returned out of our callback function is the cleanup. And then we run our effect, all the logic for our effect inside here. And then the second argument, whether we have a second argument or not, and if there's anything passed into here, will help us answer with which state does this effect synchronize with. Thanks for the follow. So it's hard to switch that mental model, but once you do, it's like, it just feels better. Again, I've been doing the class component pattern with lifecycle hooks for a long time, and it was fine. Like I didn't have any problem doing that. I did recognize that there was a lot of times if I'd go work on someone else's component or something I'd written a long time ago, that was really hard to go in and recognize every situation that you'd have to change code. If you just needed to change one thing, you'd have to find that thing in component did mount, component did update, maybe component will amount. So that was hard, but I just took it as like, programming's hard. This just makes it so easy. Put all of that stuff into one place. If you have another side effect to run that doesn't go in the same function like component did mount, we just write a new useEffect. And we pass in a function and do our second effect inside here. It's so cool. Hey, thank you. Digital Geek. Love it. Let's see. Yeah, the return. Oh, lots of questions. I love seeing the live refactoring. Refactoring is something that I always second guess myself on, and it often feels like it'd be easier to just rewrite the app. Yeah, with these small apps, yeah, I can totally see that. With a large enterprise size app, ooh, that would not be fun. Yeah, I'm gonna learn the heck out of hooks so I can use it in build weeks. Do it. Heck yeah. Hooks for the win. What's the main conceptual difference between useEffect and useLayoutEffect? So most of the time you're gonna use the effect hook. The useLayoutEffect here, the signature is identical to useEffect, but it fires synchronously after all DOM mutations. So use this to read layout from DOM and synchronously re-render. So most of the time you're going to want to use the useEffect hook instead of useLayoutEffect. But for now, if you need to do a synchronous re-render after the DOM has rendered, after all DOM mutations are finished, then you'd use the layout effect. So an example of this is like if you run an update, your component re-renders, and then you need to go grab whatever re-rendered on the DOM and then re-render again based on what's there, then you would use the useLayoutEffect hook. Great question. Do web people work with DS people on projects? I like 2 that were listed as DS projects. Yes, they do. It's a little bit harder because a lot of the data science students also know web development. And so sometimes there's a little bit of, I've noticed the last couple build weeks, web students are like, what do I do? They're building all the things. So, but I think we're finding a good place for how to handle that. I don't want to discourage you from signing up for those, because honestly, like, those are the projects with the coolest data, and data is so much fun to work with. So if you can start getting used to big, large sets of data and a little bit more complicated data now, you're going to be a lot further ahead later on. Let's see. Okay, cool. Looks like someone dropped a link for a Kent Dodds useEffect versus useLayoutEffect. Oh, hey, what's up, Jeremy? Nice. Cool. Okay, Jeremy, this video will be posted on my dashboard right after we're done here. And I'm working to get these onto YouTube, but I've been having some issues with converting the video. So I'm recording them onto my local machine. But yeah, I'm going to try and get these up onto YouTube as soon as I can. Because on Twitch, they're only available for 30 days. And I think these kind of things are really good for later use. So, all right. I'm going to go ahead and jump off. Thank you so much for coming today, and really appreciate it. Remember to follow and subscribe if you can, so that you get notified when I go live again. All right, have a great night. Thanks.